Thank you all very much. It's indeed an honor to be with you. I'm an expert on nothing, but for 30 years I've worked with gang members, so apparently Sister Joan thought that made me eminently suited to address the class of 2014. Thank you for your attention. You know, folks on the margins are just hoping for a slice of notice. I once had a very earnest 16-year-old gang member stand in front of my desk, and he said, "Look, I need your divided attention." I said, "You are in luck, because that's exactly what you'll be getting today." You know, what Martin Luther King said about church could well be said about your time as Ambrosians, that this is not the place you've come to, it is the place you go from. And you go from here to create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. You leave this place with a finely honed vision. The prophet Habakkuk writes, "The vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, wait for it." But you don't want to wait for a long time, staring at your watch and tapping your feet. You want to make something happen. You want to create this community of kinship and be a part of the birth of a new inclusion. You want to imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle. And to that end, you want to dismantle the barriers that exclude. You want to find yourselves somehow standing at the edges, at the margins, because if you stand at the margins, look under your feet, they're getting erased because you've chosen to stand there with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless, with those whose burdens are more than they can bear, with those whose dignity has been denied, with the easily despised and the readily left out. You stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop, and with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. I suspect that if kinship was in fact our goal, we would no longer be promoting justice, we'd be celebrating it. No kinship, no peace. No kinship, no justice. No matter how focused and singularly so you might be on those great goals, they can't happen without kinship. So for 30 years, I've worked with homies, gang members in Los Angeles, and they've taught me everything of value. But in the last couple of years, they've taught me how to text, and I'm so grateful to them, because I find that it sure beats the heck out of actually talking to people. And I'm pretty good at it, LOL and OMG and BTW, and the homies have taught me a new one, OHN, which apparently stands for, oh hell no. And I've been using that one quite a bit lately. So there I am in a car with two older vatos named Poncho and Manuel, and they're gonna help me give a talk. And Manuel's in the front seat. And it's early in the morning, 9 o'clock, as the day began at Homeboy, and Manuel gets an incoming text, and he reads it to himself, and he chuckles, and I say, "What is it?" He goes, "Oh, it's a text message from Snoopy back at the office." Well, I'd just seen Snoopy. Snoopy gave me a big abrazote as the day was beginning. Snoopy and Manuel work together in the clock-in room, where they clock in hundreds and hundreds of gang members who work at Homeboy Industries. I said, "Well, what's he say?" He goes, "Oh, it's dumb, hang on. Hey, dog, it's me, Snoops. Yeah, they got my ass locked up at county jail. They're charging me with being the ugliest vato in America. You have to come down right now, show them they got the wrong guy." Well, we died laughing, and then I realized that Manuel and Snoopy are enemies. They're from rival gangs. They used to shoot bullets at each other. Now they shoot text messages. And there's a word for that, and the word is kinship. How do we obliterate once and for all the illusion that we are separate, that there is an us and a them? How do we bridge the distance that exists between us? Certainly in the service that you provide and all the stuff you're committed to do as you leave St. Ambrose, there's a distance even in service. You want to bridge even that distance so that it's not about service provider, service recipient. It's mutual. One of the great privileges of my life was knowing Cesar Chavez as a friend, and once a reporter had commented to him and said, "Wow, these farm workers, they sure love you." And Cesar shrugged and smiled and said, "The feeling's mutual." And that's what we hope for, is to enter into this exquisite mutuality where there is no daylight that separates us. So Homeboy Industries was born 26 years ago when I was pastor at the poorest parish in the city of LA, nestled in the middle of 2 public housing projects. We had 8 gangs at war with each other. It was the highest concentration of gang activity in all of Los Angeles. I buried my first young person killed because of this sadness in 1988, and I buried my 194th 2 weeks ago. We did a lot of things. We started a school for gang members, and then they said if only we had jobs, and so we tried to find felony-friendly employers, and that wasn't so forthcoming. And so then we started a business. I got somebody to fund a bakery, and we had hair nets on enemy gang members, and they baked bread at Homeboy Bakery. Then we started Homeboy Tortillas a month later. Not everything worked. Homeboy Plumbing really was not hugely successful. Who knew people didn't want gang members in their homes? I did not see that coming. And now we've backed our way into becoming the largest gang intervention, rehab, and reentry program in the United States. 15,000 folks a year walk through our doors. There are 120,000 gang members in LA County. We offer classes and a variety of things. Free tattoo removal. No place on the planet Earth removes more tattoos than we do. 46,000 laser treatments a year, 3 machines, 47 volunteer doctors. So if any of you graduates are starting to regret your Fighting Bee tattoo, see me afterwards, no questions asked. And we have 8 businesses, a bakery, a bunch of restaurants, LAX airport, we have a restaurant there, silk screen, all sorts of things. And Homegirl Cafe, where women with records, young ladies from rival gangs, waitresses with attitude will gladly take your order. It's a place of celeb sightings. You know, you always have movie stars and elected officials. The entire Dodger team came for lunch one day. But we had Diane Keaton came for lunch, she of Oscar fame and Academy Award, Godfather movies, Annie Hall. Her waitress was Glinda, and Glinda's a homegirl, been there, done that, tattooed, been to prison. She didn't know who Diane Keaton was, and so Diane Keaton takes her order, asks her to take her order, and Diane Keaton asks Glinda, what do you recommend? And Glinda rattles off the 3 dishes she really likes, and Diane Keaton says, I'll have that second one, that one sounds good. And it's at that point that something dawns on Glinda. She looks at Diane Keaton, she says, wait a minute, I feel like I know you from somewhere. You know, like maybe we've met. And Diane Keaton deflects it humbly, oh gosh, I don't know, I suppose I have one of those faces that people think they've seen before. And then Glinda goes, no, now I know. We were locked up together. That just took my breath away, and I don't believe we've had any further Diane Keaton sightings now that I think of it. But suddenly kinship so quickly. Oscar-winning actress, attitudinal waitress, exactly what God had in mind. And Jesus tells us what's on God's mind when he speaks to the gathered, that you may be one. You leave St. Ambrose so that you can create that place, God's dream come true, a place of kinship and connection and mutual, exquisite mutuality. Enemies working together, people always wonder about it, and it's difficult at first. You'll get a homie who will say, I'm ready, and I'll say, okay, I have an opening in the bakery, but you have to work with X, Y, and Z, and I rattle off the names of enemies, rivals. And they always say the same thing, I'll work with them, I'm not going to talk to them. But you discover that it's impossible for human beings to demonize people they know. You can't sustain that. So I had a guy everybody called Youngster, a little tiny gang member, 19 years old. I thought he was ready, so I bring him to Homeboy Silkscreen, our biggest business, been around for 20 years. Thousands of gang members have worked there. And I introduce him to his 30 coworkers, and I watch him as he shakes hands with each one, even enemies, lots of rivals. I think, wow, this is great. Until he gets to the last guy, a guy they call Puppet. And when Puppet and Youngster are in each other's vicinity, they mumble something, they stare at their shoes, they don't shake hands. Well, I know they're enemies because I know what gangs they're from, but he just finished shaking hands with other enemies. I discover later that this is a hatred that's very personal and very deep, beyond which neither of them think they can get past. So I sensed that much at the moment. I said, look, if you can't hang working together, let me know. I got a bunch of people who want this job. And they said nothing. 6 months later, a Puppet walks to a corner store to buy something some distance from his home. And on the way back, for some reason, he decides to take a shortcut, so he dodges into an alley. Suddenly, unexpectedly, he's surrounded by 10 members of a rival gang, 10 against 1. They beat him badly. He falls to the ground. And while he's lying there, they will not stop kicking his head until he's lifeless. Somebody finds his body and takes him to White Memorial Hospital, where he's declared effectively brain dead. But they keep him connected to machines for 48 hours so they can get a flat read with no brain activity, and then they can sign the death certificate. This allowed family and friends to gather. I was at St. Louis University giving a talk. I flew home immediately. I've seen a lot of horrible things in my life, but nothing to compare to the sight of this young man with his head swollen many times its size. It was horrifying. You could barely train your eyes on him. So at the end of the 48-hour period, I anoint his forehead with oil. I say a final blessing. We disconnect, and a week later I bury him. But in the first 24 hours, while Puppet is lying beaten in the hospital, I'm alone in my office. It's 8:30 at night. The phone rings. It's Youngster, Puppet's co-worker from the silkscreen factory. He says, hey, that's messed up about what happened to Puppet. I said, yeah, it is. And with a certain kind of eagerness, he says, is there anything I can do? Can I give him my blood? And we both fall silent under the weight of it, until finally he breaks the silence, choking back his tears, and he says with great deliberation, he was not my enemy. He was my friend. We worked together. Can I say that always happens at Homeboy Industries? Of course it does. Any exceptions? Not a single one. And it shouldn't surprise us that God's own dream come true for us, that we be one, just happens to be our own deepest longing for ourselves. So it turns out it's mutual. St. Ambrose is not the place you've come to. It's always been the place you go from, and you go from here to create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. For the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, we wait for it. God bless you, class of 2014.